You know, there's something I've been wanting to talk about for a while now, and I think it's finally time. Thank you for being here. I'm a physician who spent most of my career working with adults in the second half of life, listening to their concerns, learning what actually matters as the body changes. This channel is about honest, practical conversations, no hype, just what I wish more people understood about aging well. If you find these discussions helpful, a like or subscribe helps others find them too. But more importantly, I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. If you're watching this, chances are you've spent years trying to eat the right way. You've followed the advice. Whole grains instead of white bread. More vegetables, especially raw ones, because cooking destroys nutrients, right? Low-fat dairy instead of full-fat. Plenty of fiber because that's good for your heart and your digestion. Maybe you've cut back on red meat and focused more on plant proteins because that's what the guidelines suggest. And you've done all this with the best intentions. You're trying to protect yourself, trying to stay healthy as you get older. But here's what troubles me, and this is something I've observed repeatedly over 3 decades of treating older adults. Some of these foods, these supposedly healthy, nutritious foods that everyone recommends, are quietly working against you after about age 70. I'm not talking about dramatic allergic reactions or obvious food poisoning. I'm talking about something much more subtle, digestive distress that you've written off as just getting older, inflammation that never quite goes away, muscle loss that accelerates despite your efforts, blood sugar swings that leave you tired and foggy, a general sense of weakness or fatigue that nobody can quite explain. And the most frustrating part? When you mention these symptoms to your doctor, you might hear something like, "Well, that's just part of aging," as if there's nothing to be done. But what if some of these symptoms aren't inevitable? What if they're connected to the very foods you've been told are good for you? That's what I want to explore today. Not to frighten you, and certainly not to tell you that nutrition science is wrong, but because I think you deserve to understand something that most people are never told. The rules change after 70. What nourished you at 40 or 50 may not nourish you the same way now. And sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is question what you've always believed about healthy eating. Let me start by explaining what happens to your digestive system as you age, because this is foundational. When you're younger, your body is remarkably efficient at breaking down food. Your stomach produces plenty of acid. Your pancreas releases digestive enzymes in abundance. Your small intestine absorbs nutrients effectively. Everything moves along at a reasonable pace, but after about 65 or 70, things start to shift, and not in ways that are obvious. Stomach acid production declines in many people, sometimes significantly. This matters more than most realize because stomach acid isn't just for digestion. It's the first line of defense against harmful bacteria. It's essential for absorbing vitamin B12, iron, calcium, and magnesium. When acid levels drop, you can eat all the right foods and still become deficient because your body simply can't extract what it needs. Your pancreas may produce fewer digestive enzymes. The cells lining your small intestine become less efficient at absorption. Gut motility often slows down, which affects how quickly food moves through your system. And here's something we're learning more about all the time. The composition of your gut bacteria changes with age. The microbial community that helped you thrive at 50 may be quite different at 80, and this affects everything from immune function to inflammation to how you process fiber. All of these changes are gradual. There's no alarm bell that goes off. You don't wake up one morning suddenly unable to digest certain foods. It happens slowly, over years, which is why the symptoms are so easy to miss or misattribute. Let me tell you about a patient I still think about often. Her name was Eleanor, and she was 76 when I first met her, a retired librarian, widowed, living independently in the house where she'd raised 3 children. She was proud of how well she took care of herself, and honestly, she seemed to be doing everything right. She ate oatmeal every morning because she'd read it was good for her heart. Big salads for lunch with raw vegetables, spinach, broccoli, carrots, peppers, whole grain bread, brown rice. She'd switched to plant proteins several years earlier because her daughter had convinced her it was better for the environment and her health. She rarely ate red meat anymore. By all conventional measures, her diet was excellent. Her doctor praised her for it. But Eleanor came to me with complaints that had been building for about 2 years. Bloating after meals that had become almost constant. Irregular bowel movements, sometimes constipation, sometimes the opposite. Fatigue that seemed disproportionate to her activity level. And most concerning to her, she was losing weight without trying, and she felt weaker than she used to. She assumed all of this was just aging. So did her previous doctor. But when I looked at her labs, I found she was significantly deficient in B12 and iron. Her protein levels were borderline low. And despite eating plenty of fiber, she showed signs of chronic, low-grade inflammation. What was happening? In Eleanor's case, her well-intentioned diet was overwhelming her aging digestive system. The raw vegetables she ate daily were difficult for her to break down and absorb. The phytic acid in her whole grains was binding to minerals and preventing absorption. Her plant-based proteins, while fine for a younger person, weren't providing the complete amino acid profile her aging muscles needed. And the sheer volume of fiber was causing fermentation in her gut that led to bloating, discomfort, and inflammation. We made some changes. Cooked vegetables instead of raw, some eggs and fish added back in, smaller portions of fiber-rich foods spread throughout the day rather than concentrated. And within about 3 months, Eleanor felt like a different person. The bloating resolved. Her energy returned. She actually started gaining back some of the weight and strength she'd lost. She said to me, "I thought I was doing everything right. Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" And that's the question, isn't it? Let's talk about whole grains, because this is a big one. For decades, we've been told that whole grains are superior to refined grains in almost every way. More fiber, more nutrients, better for blood sugar, better for heart health. And for many people, especially younger and middle-aged adults, this is true. But here's what we don't talk about enough. Whole grains are harder to digest. They contain intact bran and germ, which is where the fiber and nutrients are, but also where compounds like phytic acid reside. Phytic acid binds to minerals, zinc, iron, calcium, magnesium, and can prevent your body from absorbing them. In a young, healthy gut with robust acid production and enzyme activity, this isn't a major problem. Your body can handle it. But in an older gut, already challenged by reduced acid and enzymes, whole grains can become a source of mineral deficiency and digestive distress. I've seen patients who eat whole wheat bread religiously and remain iron deficient. Patients who consume plenty of calcium-rich foods but develop osteoporosis, partly because the phytic acid in their whole grain heavy diets is blocking absorption. And then there's the fiber itself. While fiber is generally beneficial, excessive fiber in an aging gut can cause problems. It can feed bacterial overgrowth in the wrong parts of the intestine. It can cause gas, bloating, and cramping. In some cases, too much insoluble fiber can actually worsen constipation rather than relieve it, especially if fluid intake isn't adequate. This doesn't mean you should never eat whole grains. It means you should pay attention to how your body responds to them. If you're bloated after every bowl of oatmeal, that's information worth acting on. Now, let me address raw vegetables, because I know this will be controversial. We've all absorbed this idea that raw vegetables are nutritionally superior, that cooking destroys vitamins and enzymes, that raw is closer to nature and therefore better. There's a kernel of truth here. Some vitamins, like vitamin C, are heat sensitive and can be reduced by cooking. But this isn't the whole picture, and it's not the right picture for most older adults. Here's what else is true. Cooking breaks down plant cell walls, making nutrients more accessible. Cooking softens fiber, making it easier to digest. Cooking destroys compounds like oxalates and goitrogens that can interfere with mineral absorption and thyroid function when consumed in excess. For an aging digestive system, raw vegetables can be genuinely problematic. They require significant mechanical breakdown chewing, which can be challenging for people with dental issues. They require robust stomach acid and enzyme activity to digest properly, and they move through the gut slowly, fermenting along the way and producing gas. I had a patient named Harold, 81, a former engineer who was meticulous about everything, including his diet. He was devoted to his daily salads, huge bowls of raw kale, raw spinach, raw cabbage, tomatoes, cucumbers. He believed he was doing something protective for his health. But Harold had persistent abdominal discomfort, fatigue, and what he described as brain fog that came and went. His thyroid function, which had always been normal, had started to decline. And despite eating what seemed like plenty of food, he was slowly losing muscle mass. When we investigated, several things became clear. The goitrogens in his raw cruciferous vegetables were likely affecting his thyroid. The oxalates in his spinach were binding calcium and potentially contributing to the kidney stones he'd recently developed. And the sheer difficulty of digesting all that raw material was leaving him malnourished despite eating constantly. We didn't tell Harold to stop eating vegetables. We told him to cook them. Steamed broccoli instead of raw, sautéed spinach instead of raw salads, roasted carrots and peppers. The difference was remarkable. His thyroid function stabilized, his digestive symptoms improved, his energy returned, and he actually started absorbing the nutrients his body desperately needed. Let me talk about low-fat foods now, because this is another area where well-intentioned advice can backfire in older adults. The low-fat movement emerged from genuine concerns about heart disease and obesity, and for some people, reducing saturated fat intake is probably beneficial. I'm not here to argue that butter and cream are health foods, but somewhere along the way, we developed this idea that fat itself is the enemy, that low-fat versions of foods are automatically healthier, that older adults especially should minimize fat intake to protect their hearts and their waistlines. Here's what this advice overlooks. Fat is essential for absorbing several crucial vitamins, A, D, E, and K. These are fat-soluble vitamins. Without adequate fat in your diet, you can eat foods rich in these nutrients and still become deficient because your body can't absorb them properly. Vitamin D deficiency is epidemic among older adults, and while lack of sun exposure is part of the story, I believe inadequate fat intake is another underappreciated factor. Fat also provides concentrated calories, which becomes increasingly important as appetite often decreases with age. Many older adults struggle to eat enough. They feel full quickly. They've lost some of their sense of taste and smell. They're not as hungry as they used to be. In this context, choosing low-fat versions of foods can actually contribute to caloric insufficiency and gradual weight loss, which, after 70, is associated with increased mortality and functional decline. And there's another issue with low-fat products: what they replace the fat with. Often, it's sugar or refined carbohydrates to maintain palatability. So, a low-fat yogurt might have significantly more sugar than the full-fat version. You've traded fat for something that's arguably worse for your blood sugar and overall metabolic health. I had a patient, Beatrice, 73, who had been fastidious about avoiding fat for over 20 years. She drank skim milk. She chose low-fat everything. She cooked without oil when possible. She was doing what she'd been told to do. But Beatrice was chronically fatigued. Her vitamin D was severely low despite taking supplements. Her skin was dry and her hair was thinning. She had difficulty concentrating, and she was losing weight in a way that concerned me. We added fat back into her diet: whole milk yogurt, olive oil on her vegetables, eggs with the yolks, cheese, not in enormous quantities, but regularly. Within 4 months, her vitamin D levels had improved despite no change in her supplement. Her weight stabilized, her energy improved. She told me she felt more satisfied after meals than she had in years. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is eat the butter. Protein is another area where I see older adults making well-intentioned mistakes. There's been a significant shift toward plant-based eating in recent years, driven by concerns about health, environment, and animal welfare. And for younger people, a well-planned plant-based diet can certainly be healthy. But for older adults, protein requirements are actually higher than for younger people, not lower. After about 65, your body becomes less efficient at using protein to maintain and build muscle. A phenomenon called anabolic resistance means you need more protein per meal to stimulate the same muscle-building response you would have gotten from less protein when you were younger. And here's where plant proteins become problematic. Most plant protein sources are incomplete. They don't contain all the essential amino acids in the proportions your body needs. They're also often less digestible than animal proteins, and they frequently come packaged with fiber and anti-nutrients that can further impair absorption. This doesn't mean plant proteins are bad. It means relying exclusively on them becomes increasingly risky as you age. I see this particularly in older women who've been convinced that meat is harmful. They switch to beans, lentils, tofu, quinoa, all perfectly fine foods, but they don't realize they need to eat significantly more volume to get the same usable protein they'd get from a modest portion of chicken or fish. And many of them can't eat that volume. Their appetites are smaller. Their digestive systems can't handle large amounts of fiber-rich legumes, so they end up protein deficient, losing muscle mass, becoming weaker, and being told it's just aging. There was a woman I treated, Martha, 79, a retired social worker who had been vegetarian for about 15 years. She was committed to it for ethical reasons, which I respected. But she came to me because she'd fallen twice in the past year, and her grip strength had declined to the point where she had trouble opening jars. Her labs showed low protein markers. Her muscle mass, when we measured it, was significantly depleted. She was experiencing sarcopenia, age-related muscle loss, at an accelerated rate. We had a long conversation about options. I didn't pressure her to eat meat, but I did suggest eggs, if she was willing, and dairy, and we talked about how to combine plant proteins more effectively. We also added a leucine supplement, which is a key amino acid for muscle synthesis. It took time, but her strength stabilized. She didn't fall again in the following 2 years. She felt more confident on her feet. What struck me was how surprised she was to learn that her protein needs had actually increased with age, not decreased. Nobody had ever told her that. I want to talk about dairy for a moment, because this is an area of genuine complexity. Milk and dairy products are often recommended for older adults because of their calcium and vitamin D content, both important for bone health. And for many people, dairy is a perfectly fine food. But here's what's often overlooked. Lactose intolerance becomes more common with age. The enzyme lactase, which breaks down lactose, declines in many people over time. This can lead to bloating, gas, cramping, and diarrhea after consuming milk or ice cream. Many older adults experience these symptoms and don't connect them to dairy. They might assume they have irritable bowel syndrome or just a sensitive stomach. But when we remove dairy or switch to lactose-free versions, the symptoms often resolve. There's another issue too. Some older adults don't tolerate the proteins in dairy, casein, and whey, even if lactose isn't the problem. This can cause more subtle symptoms: inflammation, joint pain, skin issues, sinus congestion. I'm not saying everyone should avoid dairy. I'm saying you should pay attention to how your body responds to it, especially if you're experiencing chronic digestive or inflammatory symptoms that nobody can explain. So what should you do with all of this information? First and most importantly, start paying attention to how you actually feel after eating, not how you think you should feel, based on whether a food is healthy or not, how you actually feel. Does your stomach hurt? Are you bloated? Are you tired? Do certain foods seem to agree with you while others don't? Your body is giving you information. The problem is that we've been so conditioned to follow external rules about what's healthy that we've stopped listening to internal signals about what's working. Second, consider the texture and preparation of your food. Cooked vegetables are genuinely easier to digest and often more nutritious for an older body than raw ones. Softer proteins like eggs and fish may work better than tough meats. Smaller, more frequent meals might suit you better than 3 large ones. Third, prioritize protein. This is one of the most important nutritional shifts you can make after 70. Most older adults don't eat enough protein, and the consequences, muscle loss, weakness, falls, frailty, are profound. Aim for protein at every meal. If you're not vegetarian or vegan, eggs, fish, poultry, and dairy are efficient sources. If you are, be strategic about combining plant proteins and consider whether supplementation might help. Fourth, don't fear fat. Unless you have a specific medical condition that requires fat restriction, adequate fat supports vitamin absorption, satiety, and overall nutrition. Full-fat dairy, olive oil, nuts, avocados, these can be valuable parts of an older adult's diet. Fifth, be willing to reduce or eliminate foods that aren't serving you, even if they're supposed to be healthy. If whole grains consistently cause you digestive distress, eat them less often or switch to refined grains. If raw salads leave you bloated and uncomfortable, cook your vegetables. If dairy bothers you, stop eating it and find calcium elsewhere. Nutrition is not about following rules. It's about nourishing your specific body at this specific time in your life. I want to close with something that I think is really important to hear. There's no perfect diet for everyone, and there's certainly no diet that works the same way at 80 as it did at 50. Your body has changed. Your needs have changed. What matters now isn't following the guidelines perfectly, it's supporting your strength, your energy, your digestion, your ability to live your life the way you want to live it. Sometimes that means eating things that conventional wisdom says are bad, like white rice instead of brown, or full-fat cheese instead of low-fat, or well-cooked vegetables instead of raw. And sometimes it means eating less variety, not more. In a world that celebrates dietary diversity, there's nothing wrong with finding a handful of foods that work for you and eating them regularly. Simplicity can be protective. The goal is not to optimize some abstract measure of nutrition. The goal is to feel well, to have energy, to maintain your strength and independence, to enjoy your food. If something you're eating isn't supporting those goals, regardless of how healthy it's supposed to be, you have permission to stop eating it. You have permission to trust your body's feedback. You have permission to eat differently than the guidelines suggest if the guidelines aren't working for you. This is about smarter eating, not more restrictive eating. It's about asking better questions, paying closer attention, and making choices that serve you as you are now, not as you were 20 or 30 years ago. Thank you for watching today. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you noticed changes in how certain foods affect you as you've gotten older? Have you made adjustments that have helped? Your experiences might genuinely help someone else who's watching. Take good care of yourselves. And remember, you know your body better than any guideline ever could.